Regal Needle on YouTube. Today I'm covering the topic of tools, what's absolutely necessary and what's a nice thing to have. If you're planning on doing basic hand mending, you don't need much in the way of supplies. However, I'd go ahead and spring for the better versions of items if you can, because you'll save money and aggravation in the long run. For basic sewing and mending, you'll need scissors, thread snips, hand needles, and thread in basic colors like black, white, and beige, and a container to keep them in. Bonus points if your container's a butter cookie tin. Hashtag Schrodinger's cookie tin. It's simultaneously butter cookies and sewing supplies until you open it. I prefer a see-through plastic tote with a handle because I can tell what needs to be replaced or what's running low. I call it my go box because whenever I'm traveling, I have all the basics I need to do alterations and quick fixes. Cute sewing boxes are cute to look at, but completely impractical. I have my Nana's ginormous one from the 1960s because it holds a lot of great memories of her teaching me how to do hand embroidery and needlework. But it's not something I use on the daily. Needles come in a variety of lengths and styles, which I've never really paid attention to because I avoid hand sewing as much as possible. I've had this variety pack since the 1980s. If you're like me and your arms aren't long enough to see the eye of a needle anymore, a needle threader is also a very nice thing to have too. You don't need a whole lot of needles. Just make sure you keep them dry so they don't rust. Speaking of which, all your sewing supplies should be kept in a cool, dark place. This is why your nona, your abuela, your nana, or your grandma, her go-to was that butter cookie tin. Don't at me because I use a clear plastic box. I keep that box in a cool, dry place. Other things that make life super easy are good scissors. These are your fabric scissors that never touch anything but fabric or thread, ever. An 11 blade, or you might call it an X-Acto knife, a craft knife, a scalpel blade. You also want straight pins and a magnetic pin holder, especially if you have carpet. My go-to scissors are spring-loaded shears by Ginger. These cost me about $60 before sale or using a coupon at Joann's because they make sewing and cutting so much easier. Please invest in good scissors. The orange plastic handled ones are really not great. They don't keep sharp and they're flimsy. I've had my Ginger shears for years and I've never sharpened them, and they still are very sharp and cut beautifully. The orange handled ones are basically glorified paper crafting scissors. If you don't want to invest in heavy duty shears like mine, a smaller pair of good scissors like these, or thread snips, or even this cute little guy. You can use nail scissors too if that's all you have access to. The main thing is to keep them only for thread and fabric. If you treat them right, you'll have them forever and they'll stay good, so it's worth investing a little. Another nice thing to have is pinking shears. They are nice to use for finishing edges on some types of fabrics, especially if you are a vintage sewer, seamstress, sewist. These are my Nana's from back in the day. I rarely ever use them because I serge my raw edges, and these things are kind of hard for my little baby hands to open and close. But I keep them because they're my Nana's. My 11 blade came from Harbor Freight, and this one cost me about $5, and it's got a nice little rubberized grip, makes it a lot easier to hold, and it helps ease hand fatigue. See also why I don't use pinking shears. It's got a cover. I used to have a seam ripper called Jack, but I find this to be much more usable and user-friendly. I keep this one in my mug with my pens and pencils, so I'm very happy about this cover. You can find replacement blades on Amazon, and I'm going to drop the link below to my favorite charity using the smile.amazon.com link. And I like the replacements that come in a little box that they're spring-loaded, you pull them out, and then they have a little notch to put the used blades in. So I love that, and that's my go-to. For pins, I use the flat-headed quilting pins. These are longer than your normal sewing pins, and when you press over them or iron over them, they don't melt and they don't leave marks in your fabric. when they get touched with an iron. These are my other ones, the round-headed ones, but I only use these for putting patterns together, not for sewing. Speaking of irons, you really should get a good one. If you don't have a good one, I have a gravity-fed iron, and I wore out my regular iron. So whatever iron you use, just make sure that the bottom part of it, the part that touches the fabric, we call it the sole plate, make sure it's nice and smooth and doesn't have any nicks or gouges in it so that it doesn't pick or ruin your fabric. I buy my thread colors in basics on cones because when they go on sale or I have a coupon, they are way cheaper than single spools and they are much harder to lose. A word about thread. If you see shiny thread, that is embroidery thread and you should not ever use it for sewing because it is completely unsuitable. It's usually rayon and it's a lot less sturdy than the polyester or cotton threads that you're going to get from the sewing or serging aisle. Cones are typically used for sergers, but I find that using them for sewing just means I spend way less money on thread, and that means I have more money to spend on fabric. One of the biggest mistakes beginners make when let loose in a fabric store is to find that shiny thread. It sings a siren song, and they are drawn to it, and honestly, it just really is not great for sewing. If you only need a small amount of color, I highly recommend Gutermann thread. The little spools are nifty because you can pull the bottom out and store a needle inside. Look at that, no more lost needles. Another nice thing to have is fray check. It can help stop fabrics from fraying. Ooh, say that 5 times real fast. But it also works to seal threads once you've knotted them, and it's also a must-have if you're making buttonholes or sewing on buttons. This little guy, which I don't know if you can see, is a bodkin/tube turner. I use it for making narrow spaghetti straps or threading elastic through a casing, and it's really a game changer. If you plan on doing a lot of sewing or quilting, you will definitely want a rotary cutter mat, and a ruler. And I'm going to cover how to use those in a video later on because they're kind of a specialized tool, but just keep that in the back of your mind. Speaking of rulers, you will definitely want a ruler and or straight edge. I have a few in both metric and inches. Like this one is a metal ruler that is both metric and inches. And then this is only in inches. And I also have a retractable tape measure. Another need if you plan on doing a lot of working with clothing patterns is medical supply paper rolls to trace your patterns and, my favorite, a Sharpie pen. I'll explain why you want to have them in Sewing Patterns and You later on down the line, but trust me on this, it's a definite need. As an aside, this video is not sponsored in any way by any of the brands or stores listed. They just happen to be what I've found works for me over the last 40 plus years of sewing and crafting. I'd love a sponsorship deal though, so if you have any connections, just hit me up. Also, drop a comment below with products or ideas you'd like me to cover in the future or your favorite sewing tool. Do you name your sewing tools like I do? If you're new to the channel and like what you see, please like and subscribe and don't forget to click the little bell so you don't miss out on content. Live long and keep sparkling.